Alaikum, sabah khair. Good morning all. My name is Hilal Jadidi from Takatuf Oman consulting team. I would like to welcome you and thanking you also of taking time to join us today in this webinar to talk about an interesting topic and also at an interesting time we all face during these days. We in Takatuf are pleased to inform you that this webinar and many to come initiatives are part of the new partnership with Center of Creative Leadership, CCL, to bring latest leadership development programs in Oman and also leverage on each other's capability and strength to deliver something with a quality to Oman market. Before we start, I would like really to thank CCL team, Bill, Leora, and also Casper for making this happen today, despite we are all in different time zones in US and Europe. So thank you for that. Before I end, I really wish all of the attendees Eid Mubarak in advance. It's just few days and then we will celebrate Eid. And also I wish you that an enjoyable session ahead. Thank you all. Over to you, Casper.
Thank you so much. I hope you can all hear me.
Yep.
Is that a yes? Good. Thank you so much, Hilal, and the rest of the Takatuf team. Ramadan Mubarak as well to everyone, and Assalamu alaikum. We hope that all of you, your family, friends, and colleagues are doing well, first of all. It's an honor to have all of you here today. We know these are very difficult times for everyone. So we truly appreciate, again, your time and your interest. As also Hilal mentions, we are just about to start the Eid break. So again, this obviously adds to the stress that you guys have. And again, for taking the time for something like this, we really truly appreciate this. So welcome to this session today where we will focus on resetting your digital transformation strategy for the post-pandemic future. As mentioned, these are difficult times. We've all been touched by the current pandemic. We've all been impacted. As a business, we certainly have felt it too. Our company has had to transform. Our teams have had to completely shift the way they work, including accelerating and adopting new technologies, of course. I'm sure all of you have experienced that as well. And we've also, as a business, CCL, had to accelerate other significant digital transformation initiatives across our business to stay strong and obviously, as we get through this crisis, be able to be much more competitive to the new norm. Even at a personal level, we've all experienced it. I know I have. At home with my family, we've gone through a digital transformation where my 3.5-year-old son is now doing his studies on an iPad, and he's much more fluent in using that than I am. And that's just happened in a matter of weeks, right? So a lot of change everywhere. Anyway, my name is Casper. I am the general manager for CCL in the Middle East. I'm based out of Dubai, and I'm at our lovely office now in Dubai Marina, obviously taking my precautions. I've been in the region for 12 years, and I'm sure there's many of you on the call right now. We've either met or we've come across each other in one way or the other before. Throughout my experience here in the Middle East, I've been focusing on human capital, technology, consulting, research, and people and talent development. Also with me from CCL, we have Leora Gross. She is the general manager for Sub-Sahara. She's actually in South Africa right now. And she's also our digital transformation lead. We've also got Bill Passmore. He's our vice president at CCL, and he's based out of New York right now. So quite a diverse international presence. For those of you who are not familiar with CCL, CCL is the Center for Creative Leadership. We're an executive education firm and constantly ranked top 10 globally. Through our research, we provide solutions that are helping companies across all industries, across the globe, improve their people, help them become better leaders so that they can transform their organizations and they can build better companies. Anyway, moving on. The purpose of today's session, everyone, is that we want to support you. We want to provide you insight into some of the things that you should be doing in the next couple of weeks, the next month, and the next year to successfully build an organization which has the digital capacity and the ability to stay competitive in the future. Secondly, we also want you to actively participate. Please, if you have any questions, raise your hand, put it in the chat. We will pick it up and we'll definitely make sure to get back to you and answering it hopefully during the session. Following the session as well, which is the third point, is that we'll provide you with key points on how you can improve yourself, your teams, and your organization. So we'll provide this, and this will be around how you can become more agile, innovative, transform digitally, become more resilient. And then finally, again, if there's anything from this session today where you think we can help you as an organization, as an individual, please feel free to reach out. That's why we're here. And again, we're here to support you. So again, feel free after the session to reach out to us directly. If we look at this particular slide, before we get started with the session, this is just to put it into a bit of context, what's happening even before the crisis. So what you can see here on the left-hand side is the average tenure of companies on the S&P 500 index. So these are the largest companies in the US. And as you can see, since the 1960s, the tenure of companies has only gone down. And it's expected that by 2027, the tenure of companies compared to 1960 will have gone down by more than 50%. That's quite significant. There's a lot of reasons to this, but mainly it's because of things like the introduction of digital solutions, large organizations that have transformed continuously to meet market demands, and been able to move into a much more digital space. If you can just go back again, sorry. And this is actually predictions from before the COVID-19 pandemic. So really, we don't know what's going to happen after, but it's quite likely that these predictions will be accelerated even further. So what organizations really need to consider right now, and what's really important for all of you, is that you look at how you can transform your organization, how you can adapt to the market. And this obviously will include a lot of digital transformation and technology being part of that. Also, what's very important, and we'll touch on this today, is that you have people, the right people with the right digital mindset to support your new strategy, your digital transformation. And also you have an engaged audience in your organization, that people believe in it. Because reality is that 70% or more of digital transformations typically fail. And because the people don't have the right mindset to support the strategy. So with that, just putting it into context, how important it is. And then I'll leave it now to the rest of the team to go through these important topics and how we can support you building your organization. Thank you very much.
Assalamu alaikum, good morning, good afternoon from sunny South Africa. And thank you, Casper, for that great scene setting and great introduction. And we have what we hope will be a very exciting agenda planned for you. We're going to move now into around 20 or so minutes exploring the world of digital acceleration, particularly with COVID and what this means for us. Then I'm going to hand over to Bill to talk about practical ways of how we look to the future and how we reset our organizations post-COVID. And a very special thank you to Bill. It's early hours in the morning for you, and we're very grateful to have you with us. We look forward to hearing from you. We'll then open for some good conversation. We'd love to hear your questions and hopefully respond well to them in the last 15 or so minutes. And we invite you and remind you to place your questions in the chat box as we go through our session today. And lastly, as Casper mentioned, to wrap up, we'll talk about some resources that are available to you, how you can follow up, and what are some next potential steps that you can consider. Next slide, please. So let's start off by understanding how you, our audience today, have digitally transformed over the past 2 months. And I'm going to ask you to do that by thinking about how many new technologies you've adopted in your daily life over the last 2 months. So, for example, one of the things that I've been meaning to do for so long is adopt ticketless parking, because it's really a nuisance when I go to shopping malls to carry around a parking card, find the right change to pay for it while carrying a lot of bags. And of course, with the advent of COVID, one of the first things I did was go online and introduce my ticketless parking. So that's quite a pleasure now to drive in and out of parking garages. So Asha is going to launch a poll now, and I'm going to ask you to reflect for a moment on how many new technologies or technologies you have adopted for the first time over the past 8 weeks. I'm going to give you a minute to think about that. And once you've entered your responses, please also feel free to type into the chat the names of some of these technologies that you've adopted so that we can all see what you're busy with. So I'm seeing coming in Zoom and MS Teams. Lots of Zoom. Online shopping, logistics, virtual meetings. Wow, this is going fast. Zoom seems to be the popular one today. Google Meet. Online shopping, online ticketing. Very interesting.
I will be closing the poll now.
Right, so let's have a look at the results. So almost an even spread, slightly more for between 3 and 5 new technologies. Some of you between 1 and 2, and hardly anybody more than 5. So that gives quite a good indication of what we've been busy with. And the question for us as we move to the next slide is, how many of these will have lasting impact and how many will you retain post-COVID? So if we look at trends closer to home, and this is the UAE, this research looked at which activities consumers will do more of or less of after COVID compared to before. And the net intent percentage you see on the far right is the percentage of those who will increase minus the percentage of those who will decrease in the use of those particular technologies. So this is really interesting information, because if we think that similar might apply in Oman and we look at Vision 2040, of the 5 earmarked sectors for high growth potential, we can look at travel, logistics, transport, and energy as those that might be most affected. And it will be really interesting to think about what might change in terms of impact on Vision 2040 and how those strategies might need to be rethought. So as we move to the next slide, we look at this advent of digital acceleration, and CCL uses a digital maturity or digital readiness index, where we typically look at digital transformation in 4 stages in our client organizations. And interestingly, each stage can take between 1 to 3 years. So stage 1 is the outset of our digital transformation journey. We're setting our plans and our strategies, our transformation roadmaps, and we're discovering which technologies are appropriate for us and which will disrupt our industries. In stage 2, we start adopting, and typically we adopt those in silos and in small pockets of the organization, and we start to hire key talent. Stage 3 really is about scale, where we start transforming, it's more widespread, and we see culture and practices and behaviors and new business models starting to emerge and really make us competitive. And in stage 4, we're really at the front end of digital transformation, and we start to see ourselves differentiating. So I think Amazon, PayPal, Google, and so on. Now, interestingly enough, and I'm going to talk about a client a little bit later that we work with in Saudi Arabia, we've been on a digital transformation journey with them for 3 years, and we started at phase 2 adopting, and we're now at phase 3 transforming. So this is all in the world pre-COVID. As we go to the next slide, what McKinsey data has shown is that we have vaulted 5 years forward in consumer and business digital adoption in the matter of about 8 weeks. Just think of that. So what would normally, those phases I showed you that would normally take 1 to 3 years have compressed into weeks. And with that, I suggest to you that our relationship with technology has changed. COVID has brought about this onset. So think about how your inner world has changed since the COVID-19 crisis and how it's impacted Oman and the world. So as we move to the next slide, what you and I will have experienced is an increased reliance on connection through digital technology. And look at the impact. Who would have predicted that the market capitalization of Zoom is now more than the world's 7 biggest airlines? This is a chart that was issued 3 years ago. Is that not fascinating? So hyperconnection through things like Zoom, and a lot of you said earlier in the chat that Zoom has been your single biggest adoption. Hyperconnection is also a polarity. As we increase our connection through technology, we also continue to increase our access to information and our overload. And many of us, I think people have shared with me that they feel like digital desk jockeys. You know, we're sitting at Zoom for hours and hours on end. So in time, it's possible that when we do an analysis post-COVID, it might show that social media will have caused some unforeseen negative aspects in terms of managing things like the COVID pandemic. So digital transformation has huge impacts on society, both positive and negative. So what can we expect with this increased acceleration? Next slide, please. This graphic presents the evolution of technologies and their use in leading changes in society. And the bridge amongst the two is provided by economic evolution as well. So this diagram was first used by a futurist, Gert Leonard, in 2015 when he was discussing predictions for 2020, and here we are. So looking at the graphic, you can see on the left-hand side that the technologies that have changed the mindsets and habits of people. So internet, social media, mobile, cloud have become part of our lives, and we all take them for granted. Social media is the way to keep in touch and to be informed. Mobile access is, and the cloud has just become our normal repository for everything from entertainment to photos. Then, if we look at big data analytics, we move to the green, AI, 3D printing, renewable energy, the Internet of Things, cognitive systems, which again is similar to AI, nanotech, robotics, and blockchains. These are becoming more and more prevalent and things that we refer to when we start to talk about the 5th industrial revolution. And they make the headlines of newspaper, they fill advertisements, and might not be quite sure what they are, but we know that they're coming and they're going to impact our businesses. So the convergence of these technologies fostered by digital transformation, on the one hand, is stimulating further change. So on the right side, if you look at the green line, we'll see further changes through technology and now faster acceleration, as well as steering our companies to accelerate their adoption. And that's the purple line in the middle. And then finally, it will result in a changed society. So if you look at the black line, those are the things that will now start to change the way that we work and live. And just look at Neom, again, that's being built in Saudi Arabia as one of the smart cities of the future. I think it's going to overtake Dubai. We move to the next slide. So with this, there's also a potential for a crisis of trust in technology. And I spoke a little bit earlier about this, the good and the bad of technology. So if we look at the black kind of center part in this graphic, you can see a lot of the issues, a lot of the social issues that we already think about in terms of impacting our businesses. Interestingly, it didn't predict a pandemic like COVID, but there are many other issues that are there. So as we hurtle towards this fifth industrial revolution at speed, we will ask if we are using these technologies for the good of the world. And you can't do business in the fifth industrial revolution without the trust of your employees, your customers, and your partners. And in a short while, Bill is going to speak more about practical ways of how to create that trust and how to make sure that we are creating businesses that take into account our people, our partners, as well as business improvement and results, as well as social responsibility. So when the fourth industrial revolution was more around taking humans out of industry and replacing us, the fifth industrial revolution wants to put them right back. And it asks, how can we make the world a better place rather than just being more efficient and more productive? So while fourth and fifth will work in parallel, we are going to see more around defining the ethics and the impact of technology. And it's not only about how machines will affect the way we live, but how we live in general. And I think this is something that the current COVID crisis has really highlighted. Next slide, please. So as we move to the next slide, really just want to leave you with a thought and then a story. Previous slide, that the fifth industrial revolution is around using technologies of the world for good and creating organizations which are purpose-led. And again, Bill is going to expand on this. And what struck me as we move to the next slide is that we can look now at examples of how some of our darlings of digital transformation have reacted. As we can expect more disruption, we need to make sure that we continue to be led by purpose and by an emphasis on people. So the story of Airbnb is really interesting because this is one of digital transformation's poster children that has been completely disrupted by COVID. So the revenue this year is forecasted to be less than half of what they earned in 2019, and they have laid off 25% of their workforce. Now, what's really interesting is the approach was still led by their purpose. So Airbnb has always said that they are about connection, belonging, and if you look at the mission statement, what we are about is belonging, and at the center of belonging is love. So some of the things that they looked at, and in retrenching 25% of their people, they're really focused on, well, how can we do that and still remain aligned to our purpose? And some of the things that they have done are really interesting. So in terms of equity employees who were dropped off, they dropped the cliff on equity so that every departing person could be recognized as a shareholder instead of having to go through that 1 year waiting period. Employees were given a 12 months healthcare insurance cover because of the dangers of COVID. They have things like an alumni talent directory to help, and it's a public facing website to help people leaving find new jobs. They've got an alumni placement team. They have Rise Smart, which is 4 months of career services, offering career transition and placement services. every employee left with their Apple laptop. And interestingly, which is different to a normal approach of really asking people to leave as soon as they get the news, they've allowed people a few weeks to say goodbye, recognizing and understanding how important it is to spend some time with their colleagues and to say goodbye. So before I pass you on to Bill, I will leave you with the words of Airbnb. The world needs human connection now more than ever. And I know that Airbnb will rise to that occasion. I believe this because I believe in you. So with that, as we move to the next slide, Bill, very pleased again to welcome you to talk us through how we can now put these messages into practice.
Thank you, Leora, Casper, Hilal. It's great to be here with all of you. Thanks for taking some time to be with us this morning and consider our post-COVID digital future. I'm coming to you from New York, where we share the pandemic with you. Things are gradually improving here, but the impact on our organizations has been quite severe, and we expect many of our organizations to need to transform in significant ways as a result of this.
Bill, there's a little, I'm sorry to interrupt, there's a little bit of echo on your voice, so I'm just wondering if perhaps it's an adjustment in the microphone.
Good question. Usually causes the, it probably will be okay.
Okay, let's try a little bit further.
How is it now?
Still an echo.
All right, let me switch microphones. Is it any better? Can you hear me now?
No, still not clear, Bill.
Let me try plugging in a headset.
Okay, you're clear now.
Okay, it's usually my internet. I apologize.
Yeah.
No worries. Thanks for trying.
We seem to have that problem. So I'm here speaking with you because even before the COVID pandemic, I wrote a book about digital transformation called Braided Organizations, and I'm going to speak with you this morning just a little bit about some of the things from that book. Next slide, please. And if you could click again. So again, before the COVID pandemic struck, we were already experiencing the acceleration of digital technology that Leora addressed earlier. And we had a sense as leaders of organizations that we weren't taking full advantage of technology, that we were lagging in some respects behind the advancement of technology. It seemed to be moving faster than we were in terms of the impact it was having on society and on business. And leadership, all of the people who are listening to my voice on this webinar are leaders. Leadership determines the speed at which we adapt to technological change in our organizations. The COVID crisis has only accelerated this, as Leora has mentioned, and many of our organizations are being forced to adapt now more quickly than they expected to just a few months ago. And when you think about Oman's major industries of oil and air transportation and tourism, certainly all of those industries are being affected in a profound way. And as a result of that, we're going to be interested in transforming our organizations to take advantage of all the new technologies that are available, to discover new ways to replace revenue and continue to keep people employed and working productively in society. Next slide, please. So here's a chart that talks a little bit about what we've been experiencing, and perhaps your path through this is a little bit different, but most organizations seem to be following these phases that you see along the top of the chart. Pre-COVID, then COVID struck, and then there's been an immediate response to COVID. We're in the process of moving towards transition to post-COVID, and eventually we're hoping that we're going to arrive at a better and stronger place for our organizations in the future, a smart future state. And on the left side of the chart, there are three things that we think need to be attended to very carefully. Our people, as we go through this, our strategy, organization design, business models, rethinking our future in terms of what we're doing as an organization. And finally, our customers, owners, shareholders, the government in state-owned enterprises, and how we're working together with them. So just to go quickly across the top from left to right, we think about our people, we have a tradition of employing people full-time and defining our organization as the four walls around our buildings and owning and operating our manufacturing or refining facilities, and everyone having a very clear role and traditional skills and a culture that's existed for some time. When COVID struck, we immediately were concerned about our employees' safety. We were trying to provide emotional support for families going through this terrible pandemic. We made efforts to retain key talent, and we were forced in some cases to reduce our workforce according to what we hope are going to be future needs. We now realize that remote working is probably going to become indefinite for a number of us, that this is something that Twitter, for example, has declared already that employees need not think about coming back to the office when the pandemic is over, but they can continue to work remotely, and this will affect more and more of us in society. The next phase we're going through in terms of the transition is looking back and, of course, grieving the people we've lost, but also beginning the process of redefining work and what work means and what jobs mean and how many people we'll need in the workforce. And are we inventing new models that allow us to keep our employees employed? Can we expand our workforce with new business opportunities? And also reconsidering where work is done. In the future, we're evolving to a model where our employees are not just full-time employees, but gig economy workers. Our workforce will be external as well as internal, people who are part-time versus full-time, because we need their expertise and we need the agility that having that kind of a workforce brings for the future. And we'll be working from home permanently, some of us, and we'll be adopting new kinds of cultures that are equipped for the digital world. Meanwhile, our organizations are also going through transition from very familiar business models to the unknown, from a focus on things that we did very well for a very long time and working face-to-face to being forced to immediately start to shut things down, reduce costs, problem solve, scenario plans, survive, just survive, and then start to think about what can we do going forward. And we're only at the beginning of that, and we're all trying to discover as quickly as possible what are some of the options that we have for employing this new technology that Leora spoke to in service of our enterprise and our growth and our stability. And in the process of doing that, we see many, many possibilities if we can open our eyes to them, but we also have limited resources, so we have to prioritize and rethink and try experiments and explore and test what's going to work for us. And eventually we'll arrive at a place where the world is very different for our organizations, where we've adopted new business models and innovations that we thought would be years away are happening now. And we'll operate on new technical platforms that allow us to collaborate remotely, and our organization design will be more agile than it is today. And for our customers and our state-owned enterprises and our limited partnerships with other entities, we're going to find as a result of the crisis that we're going to be developing new strategies for working with partners and working with our owners or government in the case of state-owned enterprises, and that those partners are going to be more full partners. They're going to be people we work with more closely. And our customers will shift. We'll be adopting new customers and trying to hold on to the ones that we can in the old world, but we'll be shifting to new customers as well. And we'll be shifting our ownership patterns and how we think of ourselves as an entity. Next slide, please. So our transformation challenge is from a very certain past where we understood what we were doing and how we did our work and what our roles were and where our place in the hierarchy was, to a new future that we can't yet predict. It's an uncertain future. What we know is that the faster and more fully we can embrace the sources of knowledge wherever they might exist, the sooner we'll find our way. So we need to understand these new technologies, and we need to understand the possibilities they represent for our business and our strategies, and we need to know how to use them and apply them so that we can survive in the future. And to do that, we're going to be calling on the expertise of many people who we don't even see as our own employees today. Part-time workers, consultants, experts in their fields from around the world. The difficulty is shifting our organizational thinking and the way that we operate from the past to the future. It's hard for a traditional hierarchical organization that has limited exposure to the outside world and possibilities in technology to rapidly move into a mode of adopting those technologies and changing the business model fundamentally, the way that we work, and changing power structures and changing where we allocate resources and people. So our traditional structures are going to be stressed as we start to make these kinds of changes. And just be aware that it's going to be messy for a little while as we discover our future. Next slide. So one way we're going to do that is to work more cooperatively and closely with people outside of our own organization and across geographies and time zones, and even within our organization, working quite differently than we have in the past. And so the book that I wrote was about this topic that we called the braided organization. Braided meaning that we are working in networks of people with different capabilities, usually supported by new technology platforms that allow us to work in a very different way. And in order to use the expertise that this allows, we are also seeing that the hierarchy is giving way to more of a network way of working. So the formal hierarchy isn't controlling what we're doing, but enabling what it is that we hope to accomplish together, as long as we share a fervent common purpose. Next slide, please. So here are some of the features of future organizations that are based on this idea that we're working together on processes and platforms that are enabled by the new technology. First, we need to identify what it is that we're trying to do with a magnetizing purpose that causes experts wherever they might be to join us and say, we want to be part of that. We want to be part of helping your organization succeed at its mission. It's compelling and we want to contribute. And so that allows us then to bring the outside in. The ecosystem that we now think of as not us becomes a part of us, becomes integrated into what we think of as our organization. These people from around the world, these experts that we don't even know today, become a part of helping us to succeed. And we work together in networks across these computer platforms that allow us to collaborate in ways that are much deeper than we have historically. And some of you are familiar with Slack and MS Teams and other platforms that have been developed for this purpose, but many organizations have developed even more elaborate platforms to allow people to work together collaboratively, and I'll share a few examples of that in just a second. We can't direct this kind of working. We need to allow experts to influence the direction of our organizations going forward. So leaders have to be comfortable stepping out of the middle of every decision and allowing people who have expertise to contribute, even though they're not employees of our organization, they're not under our control. This is going to be something we're going to have to learn to adapt to. As we're going to adapt to changing our structures quite frequently, because we need to do that in order to enable new technologies to take hold and work to find new customer segments. So our organization design is also going to be changing fairly rapidly. That's why we need agility in the way that we organize and in the way that we lead. We have to be comfortable with change. Next slide, please. So here's an example. Schlumberger, you may know, is a firm that does construction of large projects in the oil industry primarily, 100,000 employees across the world, 125 research and engineering facilities worldwide, spending over $1 billion a year on R&D. Now, when you spend that kind of money and you make that kind of investment and you're working on the number of projects that Schlumberger works on around the world, you want your people anywhere in the world to know what you know. So Schlumberger's challenge is they want everybody to know everything that Schlumberger knows and apply everywhere what we learn anywhere. So that makes all the difference in this knowledge-driven, expert-driven industry. So how do we do that? How does Schlumberger do that? And over a period of time, they've evolved platform capabilities that have enabled their workforce to know everything that Schlumberger knows and apply it wherever they're working. So their platform for knowledge sharing, Eureka, allows people to connect not just to knowledge, not just to search on Google, but to be connected directly to experts in the company who've contributed that knowledge to the knowledge base so that they can have conversations with those experts and bring that expertise to projects where they're working. And they do that not just through the knowledge base, but through something called the In Touch Expertise Directory, so that when I look up Casper's name on the directory, I don't only see where he works, I understand something about Casper the person, because there's lots of personal information there about his hobbies and interests, his family, the kinds of things that he enjoys doing, his experience in terms of former projects that he's worked on. I feel like I know Casper even before I get a chance to talk to him. And this, they think, is very important because it enables us to work together as if we knew each other. It's not just a cold, impersonal email relationship. It's I'm communicating with a fellow member of this community, and I'm interested in learning more about them as a person. They use a tool called Mindshare to support virtual collaboration. It's a version of Microsoft Teams or Slack. They have a knowledge community of 300 knowledge champions who make sure that part of their job is to get knowledge from the work that they're doing onto the shared platform where it's available for others. And as you access that knowledge, if you don't understand something or need help, they've got 75 help desks that operate around the clock, fully staffed by 165 engineers. That's how important it is that people work together digitally to share information. And they've integrated into this platform all of their HR functions, finance functions, so it's seamless and people don't have to use multiple platforms in order to do their expense accounting and profit and estimation for projects and so forth. And also available is decision support to enable designers and engineers to pre-test solutions that they're thinking about employing with the projects that they're involved in. And all of it also involves access, transparent access by customers to what's going on all the time. So it's a huge digital transformation of the way in which people in Schlumberger work. Next slide. Here's an example of Procter & Gamble, a very well regarded organization in the US and around the world, known for its innovative products before digitalization. But about 15 years ago, Procter & Gamble recognized that it was working in the box. In other words, they owned all of their own research facilities and hired full-time research people and had a limited budget that they could spend on research. It was a large budget, but it was still finite. And they thought about ways in which they could enhance the effectiveness of their research operations to bring new products to market more quickly, to solve problems they hadn't been able to solve. And they hit upon this idea that there's a world outside of Procter & Gamble of people who know things that we need to know. And we need to work more collaboratively with those people beyond our own organization four walls. And so they created a network, a platform that now allows more than 70,000 people outside of Procter & Gamble to cooperate together with Procter & Gamble whenever there's an issue or a problem or a challenge or an idea that Procter & Gamble would like to see people investigate, or that people in the network suggest to Procter & Gamble that they should consider. And when those ideas are brought to market, the people in the network share in the profits from that. So now they are a champion of open innovation. They are able to tap external expertise in a way that they never could before, explore opportunities to see if there's any traction to ideas at a low cost. They don't have to hire people full-time to work on a project to do that. The contact with people outside of Procter & Gamble increases the development of their own employees as they learn things that they didn't know previously. And very importantly, with partnering with outside entities, there are no limits on spending on innovation because partners find funding for things that they think are interesting and want to co-fund with Procter & Gamble. So the net effect of all of that is a huge acceleration to Procter & Gamble's innovation capabilities. So think about, your organizations and how connected you are to your external environment and what it is that you might need to do in order to embrace the network that's just outside the door through a digital platform like the ones that we've been describing. And Leora, I think it's back over to you.
Thank you so much, Bill. Let's have a look at the next slide. So this example, again, is one that is closer to home. And as mentioned earlier, we have been working with the Saudi telecom company now for 3 years on their digital transformation journey. And telco is a very interesting space because as the margins reduce on traditional telco offerings, what they find themselves needing to do is really to reinvent themselves as customer service providers of the future. So moving away from pure provision of infrastructure and products to creating integrated platform-based offerings that compete with OTT providers and compete with other industries as well. So this has been a really interesting journey because our focus has been on a number of things. One of the focus areas has been on interpreting and decoding their digital transformation strategy and saying, well, what does it mean for you as a leader? How do you need to prioritize your work differently? And how do you show up differently as a leader? How do you move from a relatively bureaucratic government-owned organization into something that is dynamic and risk-taking? How do you innovate? So the leadership journey has been one of exposure to new thinking and to companies and partners that do things differently. And it's been really rewarding to be part of this journey and to see how STC has shifted and changed. So over and above the leadership programs, what you see in front of you is a digital leadership summit. And this is an event that we held in October last year in Riyadh. And don't try and read it. There's a lot of information here. But what I wanted to emphasize from this is the focus, as Bill was mentioning earlier, on different partnerships and different stakeholders. So what we did as CCL was to bring together a number of different organizations. You can see there the logos of IBM, Microsoft. Now, if you look at the bottom, towards the left, you'll see the logo of McLaren. What was McLaren doing there? And that's really an indication of a telco company that is moving an offering in the kingdom into gaming. And so you'll see new innovations and new types of offerings and new partnerships emerge from this thinking into the future. What is available digitally, both inside and outside our organization? And some of the actions that you can see in the center really look to what are the new technologies that we can continue to adopt. So you'll see focus on AI. You'll see things around, well, we have so much data as STC. How do we monetize that? How do we customize products further using data analytics and AI? So I saw some of you were asking in the chat earlier, I think it was Chandra, about what are the things we should be looking to in terms of technology that will be impacting our businesses now. And AI is a massive one, and monetization of data, as you can see here. And so day one of the summit was really focusing around what are the new technologies we can continue to accelerate and adopt in STC. And day two was more introspective and said, how do we continue to change and adapt our culture? And you'll see some actions there around culture change, leadership, and so on. So just with an eye to time, I think we'll move on to the next slide, please. And then just ready to acknowledge, also closer to home, what you've seen from your own partnerships and digital acceleration is the partnership with between Oman Business Group and Hydrotite. And I know that this is a partnership that has been in place for 10 years. But I understand that recently Hydrotite presented its partner in Oman with a special award to mark not only the 10 years together, but also significant landmarks along the way. And so we expect more and more of the partnership and more opening up. And just a big congratulations to Aman for this partnership. Should we move on to the next slide? So as we move towards the close of our formal presentation to you, and before we move into Q&A, I wanted to offer a summary and some takeaways. So if we reflect on the 3 or 4 main points that we covered in today's session, we started out by positioning quite strongly that digital transformation is not about technology. It's to embrace people and purpose, as well as progress and results. We have to take care of our people. We have to build the future strategy and the organization design at the same time, as Bill demonstrated for us, and think to what is the new ecosystem of partners and stakeholders we need to take on board to facilitate our strategy. What are the clear plans that we need? So we need to position our plans in terms of short-term, transition states, and future. And that is very marked now as we're in this kind of emergency response to COVID. We also think to the future, and then we think from the future back. And then we need to think about how we integrate technology and people. It's not technology replacing people, but how do we integrate that to work for common good? And Bill gave a wonderful example of the braided organization and where that has worked so effectively. So completely different and new ways of working. And looking at the next slide, what we'd like to offer you as takeaways, and we will distribute after the webinar, firstly, 2 white papers, both co-authored by Bill, so thank you, Bill, again for those, and things that you can think about, very practical tips and tools. So the first one, the white paper, is called Reset Your Organization for the Post-COVID Future, and Bill touched on some of that today. And we touched on very practical strategies for resetting your organizations. And with that, Casper mentioned at the outset that 70% of our transformation efforts fail because we don't get people and culture right. So we looked at that technology curve that is exponential. People and organizations change slower. And so the second white paper, called Turning Crisis into Opportunity, really looks at how we can build positive culture and practices from now, from this crisis out, by creating direction, alignment, and commitment in our organizations, and by a combination of different leadership styles. So we will be happy to share those with you, be happy to have conversations with you about those afterwards and about some of the very practical tips that those papers contain. So Casper, I'm going to hand back to you. Thank you for listening, and look forward now to responding to some questions.
Thank you so much, Bill, and thank you so much, Leora, and thank you everyone for listening in. We hope this gave you some practical insights and a good overview of some of the things that you can consider moving forward. Again, transformation is extremely well, it's happening all the time. Change is happening all the time, but obviously, you know, as an organization, individual teams, you need to consciously actually want to make that transition and that change. We got a lot of really interesting questions. So I think I'll just highlight some of them. And I'll ask both you, Bill and Leora, these questions, and then obviously you can pick it up as you see fit. There's one from Carlos who mentioned or posted that many companies have had to start a new strategy of distance working. How is that going to influence the organization structure and make them rethink the volume of people that they have and possibly reducing manpower once things get back to normal? So I guess really what you're asking is, with the new strategy, how is that impacting the workforce? Will that go down? And potentially also, what's the opportunity for organizations? Is that something you can elaborate on, Bill or Leora?
Well, I can say this, that for many industries, we will have fewer people doing what they were doing before the crisis. What we hope is that through the transition period and beyond, as we develop new strategies with new technologies that allow us to adopt new business models, we start doing different things. And we're able to rehire or hire talent as required to do those new strategies that we've adopted, including, as I said in my brief presentation to you, that many of those employees will not be full-time employees going forward. They will be gig economy workers, experts from anywhere in the world who might join us in our magnetizing purpose to do something really exciting that has never been done before. So if you are untouched by this, you could consider yourself fortunate in one respect that you're just working from home, and that's the big change that has been made. But in another respect, as Leora said very early on, there's good and bad to technology. And some of the good that it brings is the new opportunities it represents. And it would be fun to be involved in those too. So if you're not changing, you might ask yourself, am I changing enough? And is my organization changing enough? Because the biggest mistake that most leaders make is not to embrace change and to think that we can stay the same and simply return to normal. And that I don't think is going to happen this time. So yes, fluctuations in the workforce are to be expected.
Yeah. And I think just to add to that very briefly, a very strong focus on reskilling. We can't emphasize that enough. So understanding what it takes to be a future fluent leader and a future fluent employee in the workplace. So most of our organizations will start to think of themselves as technology organizations. And we often quote the example of Domino's Pizza, which turned itself from a pizza company into a technology company and outperformed Google, Amazon, Facebook, a number of key players in the technology sector. And this rethinking of who we are also causes us to rethink, well, what is the type of work we are doing? So reskilling to understand new behaviors, new technologies, understand how to innovate, how to take risk, how to be agile, are very, very important for us.
Okay, thank you for that. We've got a few other questions as well. There's a really good one here from Mutia, asking how can organizations maintain their cultures, their organizational culture, with the new concept of working through digital platforms like what we're doing right now? And if we have any specific areas of focus that organizations should be focusing on or looking into?
Yeah, I think that's a really great question, and we'd be happy to share with you afterwards a number of tools and resources on how to remain connected. It certainly requires attention in terms of how do we lead virtual teams, how do we collaborate with people, how do we make sure we stay in touch. And there are a number of techniques and ways of doing this. And it's interesting because many teams have commented that they are closer than before because of a deliberate effort to touch base and to share. And so while you see a completely different dynamic, you see people with their children and their dogs on Zoom, for example, I think a very concerted effort to remind ourselves of the purpose, where we are going, why we are doing this, how we stay connected, and how we are reinventing ourselves for the future. So it's certainly a challenge, and something that if we refer to Bill's second paper around, well, how do we continue every day to remind people of direction? Where are we going? What does the future look like? How do we align around the common purpose? And how do we continue to connect to people emotionally so that we can gain that commitment? Casper, I know that this is an area that you're busy with as well, so you might have some comments. You're on mute, Casper.
Yeah, thank you. No, I think that covers it. I mean, it's a subject that we can obviously discuss forever. There's quite a lot, but I think just in the interest of time and for the other questions, I think we'll just move on. There's a few that are quite good that are also coming in now. There's one which is, what are the risks associated with digital transformation? Very big question. I think the most, the obvious answer here is that the risk is actually not doing anything at all. But perhaps, Leora, you could comment a bit on this, the risks associated with digital transformation based on some of the experience that CCL has with our clients.
Sure. So digital transformation is big and it's messy. And we typically, when we embark on digital transformation, we don't know where it's going to end and what our company is going to look like. And we can see that now as well. Bill spoke earlier of, we kind of have to work out the future as we go, and we're not sure who will come along to disrupt us. So the big risk is starting without a clear transformation roadmap and a prioritized plan for transformation. So wanting to take on too much at once. And companies have to think very, very clearly about where they're going to focus their initial efforts. So which products, which platforms, processes, or services should we focus on first that will give us the biggest initial returns? Because we are talking about massive scale change. So what we need to understand to mitigate this risk is that it's a completely different approach to change. And Bill has written a book about this as well. So instead of planning these big, heavy, long-term change programs, we need to understand that change is agile, it's innovative, and we go through a number of iterations. We don't look at massive, expensive digital transformation projects before we've tested them, we've learned, and we've seen how they work. We test prototypes, we see how they work. Do they fail? Can we learn from them? What's going to work? What is consumer feedback before over-investing? So risks are not knowing what results we want at the end, not prioritizing, not testing our approach, and then also not being prepared to take risk, so to learn and to fail. So those would be some of my key messages.
And let me just add one to that, because I saw some questions in the chat about, do we do this from the center or do we allow everybody to innovate on their own? And one of the risks is not keeping the top connected to the bottom or the center connected to the edges, however you want to say that. That we do have to have a direction that we decide together. And so that people who are innovating locally can innovate within the context of that direction. Otherwise, we expend our resources, we spread ourselves too thin trying to do different things that don't in the end add up to the transformation that we want to see happen. We can't control it all from the middle, but we have to provide direction. Really important.
Yes.
Few other questions also very interesting. One question from Khalid is, what is the best approach? Is that having one department that leads the digital transformation process? Or is it where you're looking at moving it out to the different functions and having them lead from potentially their own geography, from their branch, et cetera, et cetera? I did already answer to this saying that, what most organizations tend to do, and also in crisis, is that they centralize everything: direction, processes, ideas, innovation, et cetera, et cetera. So it becomes very hierarchical. The problem with that is, especially if you're trying to innovate and do new things, is that the best ideas may not come from the top. That comes across the organization. But perhaps, Leora, you can go more into this on what's the best approach, the centralized one unit or more decentralized and moving it out to the rest of the organization.
Sure. So I think to elaborate on Bill's points, digital transformation has to be led from the top. So we have to have a clear, coherent picture of what we want to do. Now, typically, do you remember those 4 stages that I showed you earlier, from discovering to adopting to transforming and reinventing? Typically, what you'll find is that digital transformation starts small. It starts in pockets or silos of an organization. Now, you might have, and it starts with some key talent and some key placements like a digital transformation officer or chief technology officer. Now, while the initiative might be centrally led, it's not going to be, it's going to start, as I said, in maybe 1 or 2 functions or 1 or 2 key areas and the most critical areas. And as you go through those phases of transformation, it's going to build and scale. Or another approach that we see in a number of our clients is completely separating off a different organization. And that is the ambidextrous organization strategy. So, because what you want to do while you're digitally transforming is make sure that you're still retaining your current operations and business as usual, because you've got to pay the bills. So that type of approach is saying, well, let's maintain the core business and then let's hive off a completely separate, more startup type of business with a DevOps IT approach that is really going to create our new products and services in parallel to running the normal business. Does that answer the question?
I think so, yeah, thank you. I think there's still quite a lot of people on the call, so I guess there's quite a lot of interest to take or to answer more or have more questions answered, so we can move on. There's another one question which is quite interesting as well, which is around leadership. Now I'm just trying to find it here. So what are some of the, when shifting to more digital work environment, going through this transformation, what will some of the key competencies or behaviors, characteristics be in order to execute on this successfully? Again, we've already talked a lot about how transformations, they fail, 70+% fail. And this obviously is linked to things like culture, people, leadership. So Leora, perhaps you can start. Bill, please also provide your input. But if you could explain a little bit about those characteristics and competencies that are really crucial and unique to the companies that succeed in their transformation efforts.
Sure. So let me start very briefly, because I'd love to hear Bill's perspective as well. It's really, I think what we need to do is focus on creating clarity in organizations rather than certainty. So how do we, in the midst of all this mess and not understanding, and we understand digital transformation is a big thing and we're not quite sure where we're going for it, how do we as leaders create direction, but at the same time we understand that we can't give certainty as to where we are, because certainty is just not possible. So clarity of direction, and also the flexibility and willingness to change. What you see in front of you is really the underpinning of our leadership journey. So we spoke about establishing direction through clarity. How do you then accelerate that alignment? So how do you get people engaged and involved? And one of the things that one of our partners, who's Bob Johansson, talks about is overcoming fear, because there's a big fear of the future and fear of taking risk and fear of adopting new technologies. So how do you help people be excited and encourage them to take on new technologies and to innovate and to do things differently? So overcoming fear is a big one. And then what you also see in front of you is scaling commitment. So the outcome of leadership is creating direction, alignment, commitment. And scaling commitment is really what we spoke about earlier, which is creating organizations where you have a meaningful role, you have purpose, and you are involved in your teams and your partnerships, and understand what the new behaviors are required of you. So let me stop there and pass to Bill for your comment.
Well, I think you know what this leader looks like because you've probably experienced them around you before. These are the people who jump out of bed in the morning and run to work and are so excited by what the day is going to bring because they're going to be involved in projects that are going to stretch them, and they're going to be trying new things, and they're learning about new technologies, and they're enjoying their contact with people that they hadn't met before, new partners and new contributors, and they're trying their best to think like entrepreneurs and imagine what they can create and innovate and connect people working in teams to each other in ways that allow these teams to be very effective in bringing things to reality and pushing that forward in terms of results. So I think you know these people and they're part of your network, and they are essential to energizing the network and allowing everybody in the network to bring forth their best contributions to the change that we're trying to make. And picture yourself being that person that is the energy source for transformation in your organization, because that's what we need, are people who are leading us forward, regardless of the level of the organization at which they exist. It's their passion and it's their commitment, their belief, and their example that helps the rest of us jump on board and make this happen.
Thank you for that. We also have a question here around, I think we've already touched on it, but one question from Khalid, which is how you can make that total shift in the organization, becoming more resilient, becoming more agile, working more agile, and what may the cultural impact be? This is also very much linked to Mohammed's question, which is around organizational structure and whether that should be changed in order to take on more digital approaches, solutions, and being successful in transforming. You know, how can you make a total shift? Well, obviously, this is not a big bang approach, although companies need to shift very quickly, and this pandemic has obviously accelerated that. But it is still difficult, right? I mean, some organizations are very big, very complex. Maybe also what they do in terms of product solutions may also be fairly complex of nature. But one of the things that we see a lot is that organizations that are very hierarchical tend to be much more rigid and be less flexible when it comes to change. So definitely when it comes to things like organizational structure, you need to look at having a more flat structure, breaking down silos, and not having that traditional hierarchy that you will see a lot. You see that in some organizations, in particular in the Middle East. So you need to move away from that. And that also allows then people across the organization to collaborate more, ideas to flow more freely. There's a lot more transparency. And that is actually part of building an agile culture. So definitely breaking down that organizational structure, potentially changing your organizational structure will be important. Will it potentially have an impact on your culture? It might have, right? Most definitely it will have. But again, that's a separate area that can also be managed. And this is about upskilling. This is about changing people's mindset. Because again, transformation is about people. So you can have the best strategy in the world. You can have ideas around restructuring, but if you don't have people on board and you don't have the right mindset, it ain't gonna happen successfully. So it's also about shifting people's mindset, which then has an impact in reshaping your culture. Is there anything you want to add to that, Bill or Leora?
I agree with what you said, Casper. I'm thinking about if I were advising the government of Oman where to invest in the future in terms of the transformation of the economy, you know, I would look at what you have that's obvious. You have oil, you have transportation capability, you have location that other countries don't have, which would enable you to become the most advanced supply chain for the Middle East, fifth generation supply chain. And if I were thinking about, you know, if I were Oman Air or an oil company, how would I move into becoming part of the advanced supply chain for the Middle East, I wouldn't locate that within my existing operation. I would think about a new organizational unit or structure that I could invite people into, both existing employees and new employees, who would take on that challenge and think about, okay, so how would we make this happen? And I think the structure behind that will evolve from the work as opposed to trying to fit it into an existing structure. So when you have big ideas and things that are transformative that you want to do, of course it needs top-level direction and support, but it also needs a space and talent that probably doesn't exist within the organization today.
Okay, thank you. We also have another question here, which is around learning. So what will the learning culture be like moving forward? This is from Shabib. Will we see more e-learning, online development solutions rather than the traditional classroom-based approach? And how will digital transformation impact these types of technologies? Well, definitely. I mean, I think we see all over the internet these days that people are upskilling. They're posting their, certificates from all sorts of online technologies that they're using and applying to learn. And definitely this time is really encouraging people to learn. They're sat at home and, they want to do something different, right? Being in a quarantine can be quite daunting at times. So definitely this will stick. It was already there before the pandemic, but it will obviously again accelerate like a lot of other digital platforms and solutions in the future. Having said that, we're still social animals. So at CCL, we still see that, the face-to-face element will be an important part of what we do and how we deliver. You cannot, neglect or take away the effect or the impact of what face-to-face learning and development has. However, there will definitely be a much larger blend in terms of how it's done. But there's also a great opportunity here, right? Because with digital learning or digital solutions, it means that you can also reach a much larger audience. So perhaps a lot of people that were not exposed to a lot of learning and development opportunities in the past in very large organizations now have that opportunity because we can now scale. And that's what we see with CCL and our solutions, is that now we're actually reaching out to a much larger audience. And a lot of organizations right now are reaching out to us because they want to actually apply this across the enterprise, not just in one location, but globally. And that is also part, again, going back to the questions around culture, building capability, is that with this technology now, you can very quickly scale and you can actually spread the message and start developing people across an organization to much quicker adopt a digital mindset and start your transformation process. And it's also having a massive impact on things like engagement. Again, people are sat at home. There's a lot of uncertainty for a number of different reasons. A great way to engage people is through learning. And that's not just because of the situation we're in now. That's always been the case. But again, it's been accelerated because of the situation we're in. We've got plenty of people on the call still. If people are up for it, we have still 5-10 minutes where we can take some questions. Are there any particular questions that you guys would like to pick up, Bill, Yora?
I think, Casper, just to close out on this thought, and one of the benefits, as you've been saying, around virtual learning is that we have learned how to be virtual learners. So that is something I don't think we imagined ourselves doing a couple of months ago. And we always used to have a question mark in our minds as to the level of digital adoption of online programs. But now that we've learned how to do it, that is certainly going to be a different mindset and behavior going into the future. So thank you for that.
I would just say to none of us know who we're going to become in the next year. This is affecting all of us in ways that none of us could have predicted. And as a result, we're going to be pushed in directions that we hadn't even thought about exploring just a few months ago. And so I'm excited by that. I hope you are as well. Obviously, you're here on the webinar, so you're interested in learning already. And that's a great sign, because I think if we don't have that attitude, we're not going to get through this in the best way possible. And I think it takes that positive attitude. We are going to get through it. We are going to learn in the process of getting through it. And we are going to come out the other side of this better than we were before we went in. I'm convinced of that.
Thank you. There's also another question that's come up a few times. And this is around, you know, the different industries. You've got companies that are already, you know, digital by nature. You've got some that are more easily transferable from your traditional brick and mortar to sort of pure players, click players. But this is one from Suresh, a question, which is around, you know, what are some of the ideas, or what is, based on our experience, some of the ideas that large manufacturing companies, they could implement to support their transformation and becoming more digital. What kind of experience, you know, or ideas can we share around this for more traditional sort of manufacturing type of organizations? How can they leverage digital transformation?
Yeah, I think you're right, because a lot of the initial companies to transform are media, entertainment, retail. Manufacturing is really, you see a range across the spectrum, and what you're seeing in manufacturing companies that are more mature in their digital transformation journey is robotics. So that, you know, I think more than anything will alter manufacturing now and into the future. Bill, I don't know if you have anything to add to that.
Well, traditional companies are not left out. we may not see the opportunities as clearly in some traditional companies as we should, but all companies are going to be affected by digital transformation and artificial intelligence and the connection that we're going to have to customers. And so what we manufacture and how we manufacture it is changing. It's already changing in terms of customization for individual customers who would like to see things done in a certain way, or certainly at a time that they most desire what they need. And so there will always be manufacturing. It will be less done by hands and more done by robots and other machines, but it's how the organization relates to its customers and to its suppliers and to the rest of the world, the ecosystem, that will really transform it, and also in terms of its flexibility and agility to make different things and use its resources to invest in new opportunities. You have to be as efficient in the core as you possibly can to enable new investments in areas that you probably don't even think about today.
Yeah, I think the cost pressures and efficiencies around manufacturing are absolutely key. So it's a big area for reskilling as well.
So there's another question around skills and leaders, which is very much to the point. The question is, what do leaders need to unlearn right now in order to move forward?
I think it's the comfort that we had in the past, you know, that we knew exactly who we were and what we did for our living, what our position in the hierarchy was, where our office was located, what our commute looked like. We had a lot of certainty in the past that made us comfortable and made us feel like we were on a certain path to the future in our careers. And I think, you know, letting that go is hard. I don't want to minimize that. It's difficult to make this transition that this crisis has brought about. And so as we are forced to do that, I think we eventually come to grips with the fact that it has changed and that we need to find a new way forward. And I think if we can change our mindset, which for most people begins with, how can I go back to the old normal as quickly as possible? If we can change that mindset to what am I excited about in terms of my purpose for the future, what I want to contribute going forward, where I want to be and who I want to work with, that we start to explore those new opportunities that this has presented us, until we get excited by those opportunities, we're going to be stuck. And the sooner we can get excited about the future, the faster we're going to get there.
Great, thank you. There's also another question. I think we've just got a couple of minutes, which is around tourism industry, which is obviously a big part of the economy in this region, and in particular in the Sultanate of Oman, where the question is really around how do you innovate in tourism when you're very dependent on the physical presence of people. I actually posted a comment or response to that, and I think, you know, from a personal experience, you know, a lot of hotels, for example, a lot of you know, touch points as a customer in the tourism industry tends to be quite traditional, and they've been the same way they've been for many, many years. I mean, I can think of something as simple as staying at a hotel. You know, I don't have access to an app. You know, I'm still having to use a traditional phone with a wire to order for room service or get my, you know, laundry picked up, or when I'm at the pool or wanting to order something. I mean, I think when it comes to transformation, there's a lot of different steps, right? You know, you're looking at, you know, managing data. You have your strategy, innovation is part of it, people, culture is part of it. You know, you need to have organizational alignment. But another very big part of a digital transformation is also customer experience. And that's actually what I've just talked about now. And there's nothing more important in tourism than customer experience, right? And again, if you can move what you've been doing in tourism, in the hotel industry, as an example, what you've been doing for the last 30 years into a much more modern and personalized experience through apps, or a much more digitally connected experience for me with your organization, that's perhaps a way to start. Obviously, you need to come up with the ideas, you need to come up with the solutions to do this. And that requires, you know, an innovation mindset. It requires that people across your organization, from the top all the way down to the people serving the food at the pool, when I'm lying there, they actually contribute to this because they're actually experiencing it on the ground. And that's a big part of the transformation, is decentralizing and having ideas coming from everywhere, flowing from everywhere, having that transparency. So hopefully that answers the question.
Yeah, I love that question, because what the airlines and hotels are starting to do, because they are thinking ahead, is they're mapping the customer journey. Now, as you map the customer journey from how do you check in, how do you order, and so on, at various points in the customer journey, you'll see areas of particular awareness now with thinking to human safety after COVID. There are various points where you can say, okay, we can minimize touch, we can maximize social distance. So they are already planning ahead to change their processes to say, okay, how can we be more efficient? How can we be more safe in this part of the customer journey as we process them, for example, in an airline? So you're going to see those changes coming through soon. I know it's time to close. I'm just really keen to answer Anwar's question, because I think you've asked it a few times. And that question is, well, what can you offer that's different to your competitors?
Yeah, that's a good one.
So I'm going to answer that. I really want to reiterate what Casper started out saying, and McKinsey data, a lot of data from Forbes, a lot of data is asking why we are not seeing the results from digital transformation that we want to see. So we spend a lot of money, time, and effort on introducing new technologies, but we're not seeing the right amount of business results. We're seeing change, but not enough. And without fail, the response on that is it's because people and cultures don't change. Now, people and cultures need leaders. So most of us, I think, will acknowledge that it is the mindset of leaders that need to change. As we've been talking through today, how do we change our people? How do we change our organizations to embrace the new normal? Think back to the two curves that Bill put up, which represent Martek's law. Technology is advancing, people and organizations are lagging. It is our role, and we understand what it takes to make leaders of the future, to embrace mindsets and to embrace change.
Thank you very much for that, Leora. Thank you very much, Bill, for your time. I know it's very late where you are right now, so really appreciate it. Also, thank you very much again to Takatuf for being part of this, for being our partner in Oman, and for being for setting this up and arranging all of this. We really appreciate it, and obviously we look forward to our partnership and supporting organizations, hopefully all of your organizations, for those of you on the call today, in the future. We do apologize that there are some of the questions that we didn't manage to answer. There were quite a lot, so that's really great. But unfortunately, we are out of time. So out of respect for everyone, we will have to obviously finish off. Having said that, please feel free when we send out the recordings, the slides, and more material to you. Please feel free to reply back, get back in touch, and we'll be more than happy to continue the conversation and help you in any way we can. So again, thank you very much, everyone. All of you have a lovely Eid with family and friends, and we hope to hear from you soon. Well, in fact, we hope to see you soon. Hopefully things will change. Thank you very much, everyone. Have a lovely day. Eid Mubarak.
Thank you. Eid Mubarak.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much to everyone.